Well, hello, and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Malin.
And we're back for our next episode of Season 2 for a podcast full of difficult conversations that we've may or may not have had off the air. And we're just inviting all of you to join us for that, right?
Jamie, as we've been, we've had a couple difficult conversations already, and we have many more planned. I'm already starting to question ourselves. Why did we pick to talk about difficult conversations? Because they're hard. I mean, even to prep for our guests that come on or the conversations that we're going to have, they're not lighthearted. They go deep really quick. Really quick.
You know, what's good, though, is we have so much practice at difficult conversations that it is kind of old hat for you and I, right? I mean,
well, yes, but we, usually
every phone call we have is difficult, right?
Okay, so I got to say this just because, and I'm not going to say what it was because it was a private conversation between you and I, but we had an opportunity to talk yesterday, and just for our listeners, I have to tell you, the many rabbit holes we went down, I can't even tell you everything we covered, but I remember passion came from both of us. I do remember that.
By the end, I'm just like, well, because we started talking about like personal life, kids, all that, like just life stuff. Like, this is what's happening and I'm struggling and let's, cheerlead me through this. And then we end up with politics and the economy and minimum wage, I think, is where we ended up.
And why you are so wrong in all of your viewpoints and why I am so wrong in all of mine. So it was a good time. I call that a good time. But you're not wrong.
We ended with me right. Exactly. So
yeah, coming over to my side of view. Yeah, that's right. I think the difference is because I don't want to say we can't be ourselves, because we are. I mean, we're not putting on a facade or anything, but I don't have to worry about how I talk because, again, we've said this in the past. There's so much history here. There's so much, comfortableness and trust with one another that we know. Like even if yesterday's conversation would have ended with us just hanging up the phone, we'd be back. We know. Like, we would just be like, okay, and we'll give it a couple hours and then maybe I'll send a text or she'll send a text. But here, it's a little bit, I don't know, for me, I don't think I can be that free with my words just because people that don't have that same relationship with me, hearing my words, I don't know if they would take it the same way. And that's what I'm safeguarding myself from is the intent is always going to be the same, but how I deliver it changes because of the audience, because I don't have that tight relationship with everybody that's going to hear this. And I want to make sure I safeguard that for people.
The other piece of that too is that we also feel the need on some level to wrap it all up at the end and almost have that informal text message exchange, because you guys don't know that might happen otherwise. So.
Right. We try to give you a conclusion with all of these episodes. There's many times our conversations personally do not have an end, and it's not nice and neat in a little package.
We're trying to give you a 30-minute sitcom with a story arch and the whole deal. We just wrap it up at the end and we're good.
But I am going to tease a little bit. One of our episodes, and we don't know which one yet, I think we decided, didn't we, Jamie, that we're just going to plug in and hit record and let everybody kind of experience the many different rabbit holes we go down. So again, I don't have a topic in mind. I don't know if you have a topic in mind, Jamie, but I think that's a good idea. I think it'd be great to let our listeners hear exactly all the different things we touch on, because some of them relate and some of them are completely unrelatable. I don't even know how we get there. I really don't.
The beautiful part of this is, and the irony of the whole thing is that by setting out an entire season schedule and being able to record as you are available to have guests on and such, that episode may have already happened even. So in the space-time continuum of podcasting, you may have already gotten it, but we will make sure to let you know in the beginning of that episode that was the episode. So if you're hearing this afterwards, enjoy. I hope you enjoyed it. We plan to do it again.
So we could be talking about a future event that has already been recorded that hasn't happened yet, if everybody's following.
I'm loving it. It's like Back to the Future. We're just trying to keep our timeline straight here, people. That's as good as we got today.
Well, and I'm feeling before we move on, because I do want to get into our difficult conversation today and our guest. It is actually feeling like fall here. It's the weather finally got cooler. So for the less than 24 hours ago, it was 94 degrees with almost 100% humidity. Mm-hmm. And this was late September. So, well, I guess middle September, but today I woke up 57 degrees, no humidity.
I know. Can I tell you, I hate summer for many, many reasons. And I think we've talked about this a million times, but one of those reasons is because I feel like I don't have any cute clothes for the summer. Like I just wear jeans and a t-shirt or whatever, right? Like, so I went shopping a couple weeks ago for fall clothes, and I'm so excited because I get to wear fall clothes to work tomorrow. Like, yay. This is a thing that happens for me every year. So I'm just super stoked for tomorrow. Happy fall. It's good. And this may also be taking place in November, and we just don't know that yet. So,
so if it's snowing when you hear this episode, just know that when we recorded it, there was no snow.
And we were excited for fall.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so today's difficult conversation. To tee it up a little bit, this isn't the first time we've had this conversation with our guest coming on, to be honest, to be kind of transparent. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. And part of me's kind of glad that happened, because the first time we talked with this gentleman, my mind, I don't know if I could soak in everything that was just being talked about. And today's conversation, difficult conversation, is around flat Earth. And I'm going to say versus round Earth, but really it's just a matter of having a conversation with someone who genuinely believes that the Earth is flat, which is, completely against my point of view. I grew up, I'm sure you have too, Jamie, in the education system where it was a round Earth conversation, round globe that you saw in the classroom. There was no questioning. I mean, we learned in history books how the Earth, people thought the Earth was flat, and then they found out that it wasn't. And so, I'm coming from it from a place of, we had a society that at one point in time believed the Earth is flat, but we have moved on since then. And what I'm finding is that's not entirely true. And this difficult conversation for me is, how do I keep an open mind to something that I adamantly know is not true? And that's difficult for me. This is a difficult topic for me to kind of stay open-minded on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to have our guest, Joe Nazaro, is joining us today. And I'd like to give you just a little bit of space to introduce yourself, Joe, and kind of tell our listeners a little bit about you, if you would.
Yeah, hi, my name is Joe Nazaro. I'm 74. I live just outside of Boston. I lived in Britain for quite a while with my wife, who's English. I did a PhD there in psychology. I worked as a psychologist originally, and then I started an import manufacturing business, which I did for many years. And I sold that business and started a contracting business. So I've been remodeling houses and building extensions on houses for the last 20 years. I'm still working. I haven't quite had the opportunity to retire yet, and I quite look forward to it. Flat Earth wasn't anything that was a new idea to me. My parents were flat earthers. It was a conversation that we had a few times with them. And then when the Apollo moon landings happened, they were very indignant about it because they just thought it was a total fraud. Members of our family worked on the missions, and they would never defend them. So that was just interesting. I never thought much about it at the time. I certainly believed in the moon landings, and I certainly believed Earth was a sphere because I was taught that in school. My parents didn't want to make me say I believed in anything just because they believed it. I had to arrive at what I believed in on my own. So I was never force-fed anything from my family. So that's about me.
So, Joe, I mean, you sound, and again, I know we've had extensive conversations. You sound like you're a very well educated, very well spoken individual. Your family seems like we could probably have multi episodes around just your family. But, when I'm sitting here and I'm hearing this, so one of the first things you go to is the Apollo moon landing, which is another historical event in my life that has really never been in question up until recent time. And I don't want the point of our conversation to be the Apollo moon landing, because I do want to get to the whole flat Earth. But I'm just curious, like, how do you respond to people who just kind of put a label on you or anybody else about flat Earth that you're just a conspiracy theorist? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that in a negative light. I love a good conspiracy theory. I love watching them. I love kind of digging in and kind of researching them. But there's almost an element of me of saying, okay, but there's a very good chance that probably 90% of this is not true. And the 10% that is has been over embellished. And it's made for a really good conspiracy theory, but not so much as really fact as far as, historical events or even scientific information. So I'm just curious, Joe, how do you deal with that? How does your family deal with that? What do you do when somebody puts that label on you that you're just a conspiracy theorist and they just kind of dismiss your point of view?
So I think that that's the intention of the government, is to divide the public by using emotive language, such as conspiracy theorist, which, from what I understand, was an expression that was coined by the CIA to stop people from questioning the assassination of John Kennedy. That if anyone challenges the government's position of the status quo or the mainstream position that they're trying to establish, they're marginalized and denigrated as individuals, as people, so that they no longer have credibility. And then that they don't have to deal with the content of what they're saying, of the crime that they may be covering up. So that conspiracy theorist is just a shorthand way of destroying a person's reputation. And I will then say, if a person accuses me of it, is, basically today's conspiracy theory is tomorrow's truth. It'll probably take you 20 years to catch up, but there is more to the story than what meets the eye. And if people are just told half-truths, that's the equivalent of being told a lie. And when the government stops you from investigating to find out the rest of the story, you know that there's something up, that something is up, rather. So that's one answer to the question. And then more philosophically, I think that when one is studying the world, one is studying one's place in the world. The world is a very complex place. There's a lot of information about it. And we shouldn't just say that science knows everything, because science doesn't know everything. And science is a methodology that has to be pressed, and we have to march ahead with it and continue to look for the truth. Science doesn't give us the truth. It's just a methodology that helps us get to the truth. So that when someone says, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist and this stuff is rubbish, I don't take umbrage, but it reflects more on those people who say that they've bought into the government line of marginalizing someone, of pigeonholing an argument, of dismissing the argument and saying it's irrelevant or superstitious or primitive. But there's a lot more that has to be investigated, and I know that, and I try to get the people to understand that they may not know everything. I certainly don't. And it's always worth talking about and delving deeper into it. And you just have to find out where it takes you. I can go on, but I'll be succinct. Yeah.
No, I love that. And, again, what I find fascinating about you and your point of view is, they kind of go parallel to some of the things that I kind of hold dear. I like to think that I'm a free thinker. I like to dive in, and I don't want to just take it, at face value. I want to kind of see it for myself. And I also am in the camp that science isn't all-knowing, and they don't always have the right answer. And sometimes that answer changes because of the information that we collect throughout the years. So I completely agree with all of that stance. I guess my first question then around flat Earth to you, Joe, is what scientific proof or lack of scientific proof makes you, and it sounds like your family, believe that the Earth is flat when that is contrary to the other scientific evidence that we have that it is not flat, that in fact it is a round Earth?
So it's a very deep question. It's a very long question, that. Astronomy is considered the mother of all sciences. It's the first science. And it replaces astrology, basically, where the ancient people studied the stars because the stars somehow ruled this world. It ruled our behavior. It affected our behavior. It may have ruled events. They may have thought that. We aren't sure. But the study of the stars was the study of Earth, and maybe they had a Gaia hypothesis that Earth and the heavens were all alive and we're all part of one organism or of one being. Astronomy takes the spirit out of the sky, and with very, very dubious evidence, the first philosophers, they weren't astronomers at that point, came up with the notion that Earth was a sphere. So Aristotle posits 3 proofs that Earth is a sphere, and that comes down to us. There are a lot of concepts in there, and I'm going to skip over a lot of the history. I'd like to discuss it, but I know you want to get on with a lot of information here, and I don't want to bowl you over with just the beginnings. Eventually, they start to say, and it's Kepler, who uses the work of Tycho Brahe, who was the last naked eye astronomer. Kepler takes over the observations of Brahe after Brahe mysteriously dies, and he applies mathematics to the positions of the stars, and he comes up with the first 3 laws of science, the laws of planetary motion. So he's applying mathematics to the sky. That's a huge thing. We use mathematics to describe the world, and now he's using mathematics not only to describe the world, but to say that these are laws that nature is obeying. So he's stealing theological concepts, the concepts from theology that God has laws that man must obey, and he's applying this now to the natural world. Mathematics is a formal system. It's a deductive system. And you have proofs in mathematics where you say this is true or this is false. We don't really have that in nature. We can't define things that easily. We can't even define what is life, which is a very basic concept, with any facility at all. Everything is a little bit hazy in nature. So that there's a big argument in philosophy, and that's whether there is necessity in science, or whether science has no laws, but it's just constant contiguity. That all we see is we see one event follow from the other. And one event sometimes may not follow from another. So it's not subject to a law. It's just that they always happen to go together. So what we're doing here is you're saying that mathematics can describe the heavens. So that what you've done is you've established a formal or a deductive system to describe reality, and that reality that they're describing is the sky. And I have problems with that. That may not necessarily be true. Those events in the sky probably take, the astrologers said, 27,000 years to repeat. And the astrological observations, the signs of the zodiac, have a year that's considered 2,160 years. So that you have your various ages, like we've just entered into the age of Aquarius, and we left the age of Pisces after 2,160 years. So it's easy to say, okay, these are laws that always happen because you're dealing with different lengths of time than what we deal with here on Earth. So does that make any sense? And why don't you comment on that much?
Well, I was going to say, I think I kind of track where you're going. as far as, it's difficult. It's difficult to put all of that into words. I think I track where you're going in that we're applying one type of science to another type of science, that just because these things seem to occur at the same time does not mean it's a law of science. I think let me just go back to basics, because that's kind of where I'm starting, right? There are things that I have been able to observe, right, in my life. And to me, those are things that kind of show me, okay, all of the things that I've been taught through school is playing out repeatedly for me, right? So some of those things are things like eclipses. We've had a couple of here in the last few years that I've been able to observe. A solar eclipse. I've seen several lunar eclipses. Even the cycles of the moon indicate to me how all of the things that I have not personally seen, as far as being outside of the earth and seeing a globe, but I can see how all of these things track together. How would you explain some of those things? Like, even tides and things like that are tied to, the moon and the orbit around the sun and things like that. How does that work on a flat earth?
So let me just go back. What I was discussing is, does mathematics describe reality? So if I say 36, 24, 48, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. But those could be the measurements of a table. Not all tables are described by mathematical description in inches. A table is much more than just mathematics. The application of mathematics is applied to the heavens so that you can have formal laws which prove that science has the truth. It comes out with a proof. It's necessarily true. The sky has to exist in this way. And what I'm saying is, I question the fundamental notion that science ever arrives at truth. It's just a methodology. It's just a thing of studying things systematically. There's no necessity in science. Things just go together. And that's what we're studying. It's the formal system, the deductive system, is a very strange way of doing science. So flat earthers consider themselves inductive. What we do is we take observations and we try to put them together into a more general theory. So some of the observations may be false, may be wrong, but it doesn't falsify our complete theory. However, the deductive system that was established by astronomers, if there are flaws in that system, the whole system falls like a house of cards. So, for instance, astronomy does not describe the phases of the moon, even though people think that it does. So there are these memes online where a person holds up a golf ball and the moon is there in the background, and the shadow on the moon and the shadow in the background appear very, very similar. But closer observation shows that no, that it's called the moon tilt illusion, that the moon, the phases of the moon, and the position of the sun aren't really correlated. So that when the moon's in certain positions, the phase according to the position of the sun is wrong. So modern astronomy does not predict the phases of the moon. Modern astronomy does not predict eclipses. For that, they use the Saros cycles. That was something that was developed by the ancient flat earth Chaldeans 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago. So that the mathematics of the heliocentric theory is not, in fact, what's used to predict an eclipse. They use a flat earth methodology. If you look at the eclipses, this is one of Aristotle's proof of the sphere, that the earth is a sphere. He says that you see a curved line on the moon, and that is the shadow of the earth passing over the moon, occluding the moon. But that's not true, because there's this phenomenon called the selenelion, which I observed here in my town a couple of years ago, whereby the sun is up and the moon is up being eclipsed, which it can't be eclipsed by the Earth because the Earth is not between the sun and the moon. So the selenelian is proof that the eclipse of the moon is not caused by Earth's shadow on it. Yet the commonplace belief in what science teachers teach children in school is that's a fact. And people then see it that way. But it's false. That's not real science. So then you get your globe Earth defenders. They'll try to say, oh, that's the refraction of light in the heavens causing the light to bend, the shadows to bend. And that's very dubious. That's never been proven. It's a hypothesis to save the deductive theory, which is falling flat in its face. However, there's no proof of it. It's just a hypothesis. And I think it's probably a bad hypothesis because I don't see how light can bend in a vacuum. It has to bend as it goes through one medium to another medium. So there's a lot of stuff. Now, the solar eclipse, the shadow of the moon on Earth, we always know that an object that's in between a light source and where it's casting the shadow that's casted is larger than the object. So what they come up with is the umbra-penumbra theory, so that the penumbra, I forget, I'm confused right now, is going to be smaller than the actual shadow. So that we get the moon, which is 22,000 miles or so in diameter, casts a shadow that's only 60 miles wide on Earth. Which is, again, it's very speculative. It's rather dubious. And generally, you only get a penumbra type of a shadow with two different light sources. So the astronomers say, well, because the sun is so large, the light beams are coming to a point around the moon and focusing down on Earth, creating an umbra-penumbra. Well, again, this is not proven. It's speculative. It's hypothetical. Okay, grant them that can actually happen. Then they look at the timing of the shadow, and the time that the shadow is cast on Earth doesn't match with what should be predicted from the heliocentric theory. And then they look at the path of the shadow, and that also doesn't match by what's predicted from the heliocentric theory. So now you have a theory that can't predict the phases of the moon. It doesn't predict when eclipses occur. It doesn't describe the path of the solar eclipses, and it doesn't really describe how a lunar eclipse occurs. So basically, it doesn't describe anything, but you're still taught basically the history of science in school as if it were a fact, as if it were true. Because remember now, mathematics is describing science, and it's creating proofs, mathematical proofs, and truths that can't be questioned. But that's all a lie. It's all a myth. So you are being introduced to the mythology of pseudoscience because they want to use science to rule, to maintain their power. And this is wrong. So that flat Earth unravels a lot of the lies of this system of indoctrination, and it's a great threat to the people in power. Otherwise, they wouldn't even bother censoring it as they do and marginalizing people who try to defend the flat Earth or who question mainstream astronomy.
So, Joe, I'm going to jump in here for a second. I was going to wait to use this question towards the end, but you kind of opened the door, so I'm going to walk through it. And I have other questions on the flat Earth concepts that you've been talking about. But my first question to you is, what would be the point if we had a flat Earth or a round Earth? I guess what I'm lacking to understand is why would there be a need to make people believe we're on a round Earth rather than a flat Earth if in reality we are sitting on top of a flat Earth? I don't understand the reasoning why people would do that. Do you have a theory?
Yeah. The last time we spoke, again, a lot of this starts thousands of years ago. So the Roman Catholic Church, to distinguish themselves from the Hebrews that had just rebelled against the empire in Rome, decided to wipe out the Jewish state. They destroyed the temple. They scattered the Jews beyond the walls of the empire all over Earth. wanted to curry favor with the emperor. And the Bible is basically a flat earth document, but the Catholic Church adopts the pagan teaching of earth as a globe. And even that, we discussed last time, is rather a dubious concept, because what the pagans meant by the earth being a globe is basically a philosophical point. They were realists, and they believed that the real truth was outside, beyond this reality. There were existence in the sphere of earth. The sphere is a perfect shape, so earth must be perfect, so earth must be a sphere. And that sphere is something that may not apply to this reality, but this reality has to approximate it. So they call this philosophical realism. And the Catholic Church adopts this pagan teaching. And I think they do it to distinguish themselves from the really unpopular Jews, to curry the favor of the emperor, so the emperor will eventually adopt Christianity as the main religion of the empire, which it happens under Justinian. Right? It's Justinian, yeah. Isn't it? Yeah. So this belief, the church now controls all education. They control the universities. And the priests, the educated people, who are generally the people who are doing philosophy, who are studying the world. And you don't get your scientists until the after the Reformation, when the Bible's printed. But all the scientists or all the teachers like Newton are priests. And if they want to do astronomy, they're going to basically be towing the line of Earth as a globe. And the way I look at it is, during the age of discovery, when the ships start going out and they're sailing around the world and the European imperialists are taking over everything, their technology, and I don't think the technology evolved from science. The technology evolves from there being a freed up source of money with money lending. Their technology allows them to rule the world. But this doesn't give them the soft power, the cultural dominance. So they use science or pseudoscience to have this racial superiority, so that they can now impose their superior culture on the rest of the world. And it wasn't just Christianity. The missionaries went out and they wanted to convert everyone to Christianity to save their souls. But most of the people were impressed by the sheer power, and that power came from science, is what they were taught, is what we use to dominate the world. So people would want to learn our science. They wanted to learn about evolution. They wanted to learn about physics. They wanted to learn about astronomy. So that I think it gave the Europeans this prestige, which I don't think was necessarily an honest, earned domination from science. It was all hypotheses. It wasn't truth. Okay, so that's fine. Why would they want to continue with this after, say, the age of reason, and you have all your mathematicians and whatever, in the age of discovery? Because what they were doing now is they're bringing ships back from the New World with plunder. And the ships are filled with gold. And England was going after the Spanish and the Portuguese ships coming from the New World with pirates. So it was very much to their advantage to conceal the trade routes. And the best way to conceal the trade routes is with false maps and false geography. So now the whole lie of the globe becomes something that has a certain advantage, where most people don't know which way to set sail to raid those ships. So I think that there was, well, my internet connection is unstable, but I think that there's a real reason there. Now, the map of the globe, the maps that are written on the globe or drawn on the globe, can't be true, because they aren't able to determine the longitude to which their ships are going. They don't know how far east and west they're going. They know how far north and south the ships are going in the age of discovery, because they're using sextants, and they can tell the position of the North Star. and they know the latitude of the star by its angle on the Earth, and that tells them their latitude. But the stars are constantly moving east to west, so that they don't know the position of the stars to do any fix that way. So it's usually attributed to Galileo, where he comes up with what's called the two-clock method. So if you know what time it is in, we'll say Greenwich, it wasn't at that point the prime meridian, but say it's Greenwich. If you know what the time is in Greenwich, and you know the time it is in Greenwich on your ship, and you know the position of the sun where you are on your boat, you can then determine the latitude because you know how many hours away from Greenwich you are. And there are 24 hours over the span of Earth, whether it's flat or whether it's a globe. So now they know how to do that. They know how to determine longitude, and they can start drawing accurate maps to plant these maps on the globe. The globe was drawn before the invention of the chronometer that allowed them to do that. So everything that's drawn on the globe is highly inaccurate. And I see this, like I'm quite familiar with the map of Massachusetts. The map of Massachusetts is originally drawn to look very short. It's like a east to west. It's very short originally. It probably only goes to what's on the map today, to what's the river in Connecticut that goes through Connecticut to New Haven? Damn it, I should know this.
I was going to say, I'm far away from Connecticut.
I think it's the Connecticut River that goes across Massachusetts. And I think that the map only went as far as the Connecticut River. All of Massachusetts from the border of New York is that short. And then with time, they elongate the map of Massachusetts. And I think that the elongation of Massachusetts is a falsification of the map. So the original cartographers were correct. And what eventually evolves as more accurate geography is plastered over to justify the globe. So all the maps are inaccurate. We have no real way of knowing the east-west dimensions. So that this becomes even more true south of the equator than it is north of the equator. The maps are very, very inaccurate south of the equator.
Well, I would say, just based on the theory that the Earth is flat, the entire map system is probably flawed if that is your belief system. I'm going to be super honest, though. You were talking about theories that I'm sure I've been taught, but not by name. And you're talking about some ideas that are much bigger than the space that I live in. So, it's okay. I'm curious, and I do think I asked you this question last time, so I know your answer, but I thought it was an important one because this is what I've always been curious about when it comes to a flat Earth. If the Earth is flat, I still don't know that I quite understand how we see the phases of the moon. And if the Earth is flat, where does the water go?
So let me take the second part of the question first. Antarctica isn't an island continent at the bottom of a sphere, at the bottom of the globe. Antarctica exists. It's a ring of ice around the perimeter of the flat Earth. It's not a ring of ice alone. There's land under the ice. And the ice, they say, goes 2 to 3 miles high on this ring of land. And that in itself is peculiar. If it were, in fact, an island continent at the bottom of the sphere, since it gets the same amount of sunlight as the North Pole, the South Pole and the North Pole should be symmetrical in life forms and in the amount of ice and in the climate, but they're radically dissimilar. Antarctica doesn't have very much naturally occurring or naturally evolved life on the ring of ice. It has life that migrates there, like penguins or walruses or whales. But very little life is evolved there. But the North Pole has a lot of life around it. And people live as far north, I believe, as 77 degrees latitude. And there is no life. As a matter of fact, people are not free to go further south than 60 degrees latitude. Now, we have great cities in the northern, I'm not going to say hemisphere, north of the equator, at 60 degrees latitude. I think that, is it St. Petersburg? Some Scandinavian cities, maybe Oslo. I think that Reykjavik, some Alaskan cities, Fairbanks, are all up above 60, but south of the equator, there's nothing. You weren't even allowed to go there. I think the last settlement is in South America at about 55. And you have big industrial cities in the northern hemisphere at latitude 55.
When you say we're not...
Pardon?
Well, I'm curious, if when you say that we're not allowed to go there, what does that mean? Are you saying
so
it's...
in 1956 or 57, the Antarctic Treaty was agreed upon by the nations of Earth. And the terms of that treaty say that the continent of Antarctica, the land mass of Antarctica, cannot be militarized. It cannot be used to gather any resources, although it purportedly has a lot of uranium, coal, and lots of natural resources. None of those resources can be exploited. No one can go there without permission further than latitude 60. And if you do go there, you can be arrested or turned around and to go back out to sea. Some people did test this. Pardon?
Like who governs that? Who do you get permission from, or who would arrest you? What I mean that's
so we as Americans must get permission from our governing authority, from the United States of America, so that when you go on like a hurdy-gurdy cruise or one of these cruises to Antarctica, the cruise operator gets that permission on your behalf. So to you, you don't believe that you did need permission, but the cruise operator does get that permission for you. And certain flat earthers have, in fact, studied who the cruise operators were, and they seem to have ties to the CIA.
That, and that actually brings up a question I have for you too, is, if there is an ice shelf all the way around a disk, a flat earth disk this is just my brain trying to put this together in terms that I can understand, right? Is there anyone in your community who has been able to observe that? Or where do you come to that knowledge with where, because I'm thinking, goodness, we can go on pretty long trips in a boat. We can go, we can send planes to go look. Is it so far that we can't get there? How do you know? Is there someone who in your community that says, hey, I've seen it, guys. This is how we know this is there?
It's really interesting, Jimmy. All this stuff is astoundingly interesting. There was a resurgence of flat earthism, I think, in the 1820s, and one of the guys who does it is Samuel Rowbotham. Be that as it may, the Bible and all ancient literature describe the flat earth, and they describe like a ring of ice around the edges of it, and so on and so forth. Let me go back. Just one more thing about Antarctica. There's a map of Antarctica. And it was the Pere Rees map. It's this Persian fellow, I believe he's Persian or Iranian, who does this map before the age of discovery. And he draws a map of Antarctica. And this ancient map is certified to be the map of Antarctica by, I think, some military people, the Air Force here in Massachusetts, so that they confirm that it's the map of Antarctica. But Antarctica isn't really reached. Captain Cook just about gets to it. He sees the ice flows. He was ordered to turn south in one of his missions to find out something about Venus. He was taking these astronomers to the South Seas to prove something about Earth. Yeah, and he goes south. He doesn't really quite find it, and eventually, after in the 1800s, they start hitting the shores of Antarctica and they discover it. It isn't until they supposedly discover the South Pole. This was Scott, who dies there, in the Norwegian Amundsen, who discovers the South Pole only in 1911. And then Admiral Byrd goes there and he camps out over a winter. He's the first person to have survived a winter in Antarctica. And Admiral Byrd of the United States, eventually, he goes back after World War II in this operation called, it's Operation High Jump. And they're jumping up high onto the ice wall, over the ice wall. It sounds like Game of Thrones stuff. To ferret out the enemy from Antarctica. Now, who the enemy was, we never know, but he had an international force. He had two fleets of ships come down there. He had the first rocket-launched aircraft off an aircraft carrier. He was equipped for 6 months, and they turned down after about a month, and they had suffered casualties and losses. But now, who he was ferreting out, we don't know, but we do know he was working with the Nazis during the 1930s. So the mission, I think it was 1949 or mid-1946, I'm not sure when, I think it was 49, didn't accomplish what they set out to accomplish. This is all kind of weird stuff. And that's, as far as it gets, is weird. He goes back, and I think it's 1954 or 55, in Operation Deep Freeze. This is the first aerial survey of Antarctica. In all the newsreels I've found, I can never find one where they complete the aerial observation or the aerial survey of Antarctica. He has people start out in the same place. One travels to the east, one travels to the west. They never met up. The early explorers in the Age of Discovery, going around Antarctica, clocked up 75,000 miles, 60,000 miles, 55,000 miles. They were clocking up more miles than there are in the supposed radius of Earth. The radius of Earth is just under 20, it's just over 24,000 miles, 24,900 or something like that. How do you go from 24,000 to 65,000 miles at the bottom of a ball, which is supposed to have a smaller ring around it? It doesn't make sense, does it? None of it makes sense. So from the Age of Discovery and those early expeditions around Antarctica, we get a lot of information. It doesn't jive with what we're taught. And the story gets longer and longer. So in the logs of the early Antarctic explorers, they talk about ships crashing in the darkness of night. 2 of Captain Cook's ships crashed in the darkness of night. And that happened towards the end of November, during the Antarctic summer, when there's 24 hours of sunlight. So he's describing crashing at night, yet the American government and the modern governments of the world say that there's daylight, but they're the original logs of the people who traveled there before the propaganda of the globe was laid on really thick, said it was dark. So flat earthers do not believe there's 24 hours of sun in Antarctica during the summer months as there are in the north, in the Arctic Circle or around the North Pole. We don't believe that there is 24-hour sunlight. The videos that are posted that show 24-hour sunlight, I've seen 3 of them, and 3 of them are all fraudulent. Why are they posting from the research stations from New Zealand 24-hour sunlight and a 24-hour camera that's fraudulent? And they admitted it was incorrect. There was a flaw in their broadcasts of the 24-hour daylight down there. So that's the history, a little bit of the history. So that in 1956 or 57, after the aerial observations of Antarctica, and this coincides with the first geophysical year, they cut off Antarctica by signing the Antarctic Treaty from the general public being able to visit and explore freely. So if you want to go down there to see whether or not you can walk across the ice continent, you have to have permission to do it. If you get permission to do research down there, which you won't unless you're from an accredited university, if you get permission to go down there, you are not free to publish the results of your research. It has to be proofed and reviewed by the governing authority. And in our cases, we're Americans, that would be the United States. You can't overfly Antarctica unless you have a 4-engine airplane. There is a lot of east-west circumnavigation of Earth. There's supposedly only 3 episodes of north-south circumnavigation of Earth, and those three flights are fraudulent, according to people who have researched them and followed up on them. So there's no north-south circumnavigation that we know of. It certainly isn't commonly done, if it is done at all. But there's loads of common east-west circumnavigation of the world. So that in itself is strange. So you have a very different ecology, a very different environment, a very different climate. It's cut off from the rest of the world. None of this makes sense. But in flat Earth theory, it all makes sense. On the globe, none of it makes sense. On flat Earth, it all makes sense.
There's quite a bit of things that I want to touch on, and again, I'm being mindful because there's so much here. But one of the things that I wanted to say is, do I believe science answers all of our questions? No. Do I believe that science can be wrong? Yes. So this is not me saying science is infallible and is always correct. But I want to say is we live in a time on this planet never before seen, where we can now observe the what was once unobservable. So, we have telescopes that reach far out into outer space now. I have a telescope that I use with my family, and just about 6 months ago, took it out with my 2 sons to look at planets that we could see in the night sky. And those planets looked round. We looked at the moon really closely. It looked round. We have people going into outer space, and believe it or not, I mean, there's people that have gone up into a space station. There's people that have gone to the moon. We have pictures, satellite pictures orbiting the Earth showing what it looks like. We have major corporations now that have taken the entire circumference of the Earth, although I can understand that could be questioned, but we have now mapped the globe. Our community as a global community keeps getting smaller and smaller. And we have, for the first time, a private sector that is able to launch up into and obtain orbit around the planet. So I hear the theories that you're using, and I think they're interesting and they're very fascinating. And I also think they might be a little bit outdated. I mean, we're talking, if you go back to how people were using maps and the stars and the time to kind of navigate the seas, we have technology that has vastly improved since then. So I guess my question to you is, you would recognize that our ability to observe things that were once unobservable to us is becoming smaller and smaller. So wouldn't somebody at this point be able to say, this is wrong, this is not right, we are indeed on a flat Earth? There would be proof of it. I mean, even if you had a country, let's just say the United States, that wants to hide it from its people, it would almost become a race to say who could tell the truth the most, because it would blow away everybody else on the planet. It would be the biggest secret you would want to tell just because you knew the answer. And I don't know anybody, even if it was a collection of countries, of anybody who would sit on something that large. So I was kind of looking for your reaction. I know I just kind of threw a lot at you, but that's kind of where my brain's going after I was listening to you. Is we're not, our global community is getting smaller. We have the abilities that we didn't have at one point. So I'm curious, what's your response to that from your flat Earth point of view?
So there's about 4 directions I want to go to from that. The first, we started out, and I think that what you've said is you've instantiated the danger of using technology, especially technology that's in limited hands, i.e. the hands of the government, to define our relationship with the world and our understanding of the world. Because the one thing the government we know does, and I think we can all agree on, is the government does deceive us and it does lie to us. There's a long history of that, and there's a lot of evidence to illustrate that point. And they're using science now, pseudoscience, to bamboozle us, because they want to use science to short-circuit public debate and democracy, because they're going to appeal to the higher authority and the truth of science. The Galileo takes the telescope from Holland and he makes his own telescope. And he immediately turns that telescope on the skies to prove the rotundity of Earth, supposedly. He proves that. I really don't believe that he did that at all. I think he used some very dubious observations. His telescope was less powerful than my iPhone. His ability to amplify what he saw in the distance was very, very limited compared to a camera that you buy in the store today. And here's what's exciting, is now those instruments that you've just referred to, your telescope, was in the past something that only the universities or the astronomers had. No, you actually have that telescope. And like Galileo, you've chosen to use it to study the skies and to stand in awe of the rotundity of Earth and the truth of science. But flat earthers have basically taken that very same equipment, and I think they've performed real valid citizen science, science that isn't being performed by the universities and the academicians or the governments. They're checking on the science that we're taught and told. So I have a P1000, I have some, equipment, and I've used it to see that the Earth is indeed flat, that there is no curvature, that I can see way too far, and it's not due to the refraction of light. And I can make observations that discount any possibility of refraction, causing me to misinterpret what I'm seeing, to prove that the horizon is not where it's mathematically predicted to be. That when the horizon is supposed to be 2.12 miles away, it's indeed over 6 miles away, minimum, or perhaps beyond that. But I can measure that it's beyond 7 miles away, and it has got to be 2.12 miles away or 3 miles away. I can see ships that go off the coast of Massachusetts 25 miles, and that's impossible on a globe. So I'm using the very same equipment you're using, but I'm making very different observations. I'm making observations that can falsify science. The astronomers are making observations which cannot be falsified. Now, you're talking about private contractors or private companies that are actually going up into space, as if private corporations were somehow honest or trustees of the truth, or that they don't lie to us. And I don't think that that's any characteristic that we would ever want to attribute to a private corporation, because they're only there to make money. And Musk, the person who's doing this, has opened all his books to the U.S. Air Force, and he's basically a government contractor, taking vast sums of government money, and he's just proving to you what the government tells him to say is true. But it's a joke. I mean, if you believe that he sent up his roadster into space, and the polypropylene bonnet, or rather hood, didn't buckle in the heat or the sunlight, and the foam tires didn't explode with the air bubble and the vacuum of space, and the foam seats didn't explode and melt, and the paint, which is just regular stock paint, didn't distort. I don't think it's possible. He said he didn't change the car in any way. The car should have been destroyed once it was released from the ISS, or whatever it was released from, the space vehicle. It's all smoke and mirrors.
So, Joe, one other thing, and I'm sorry. No. I asked you the questions you were answering. I love it. One last thing that just popped in my head, so I have to say it, is, you made reference to you can see further on the horizon than you're supposed to, right? I think you said something about 2-point-something miles, but you can see up to 6 miles. Could this be a case of maybe, this is just off the top of my head here, but what would happen to all that math and all that proof? What happens if the Earth is larger in size than what we think it is? What happens if our planet is bigger than, and maybe there's a reason, again, this is going to be the birth of another conspiracy theory, but what happens if it's not so much that the Earth is flat, but what if the Earth is bigger? And so the curvature doesn't appear to be what it should appear because we have the size of the planet we're living on misidentified.
So, I mean, how they determine the circumference of Earth, I mean, it goes back, obviously, to, what's his name? Eratosthenes, who determines, because the rays of the sun are parallel and the shadows of the stick in the well are parallel between Alexandria and this other place in Egypt, and he calculates down to the last mile the circumference of Earth. That's something that we've known for years, supposedly, if it's true, and I doubt that any of it's true. And his observations could also have been attributed to a local sun. A small local sun is what the flat Earth believes. So he didn't really tease out the difference between a flat Earth and the globe. But this is used as the basis of astronomy. And all the astronomical measurements would be wrong. Physics would be wrong if the Earth were bigger. And the amount of hours in the day would be kind of different. It would be 24 hours because the sun goes around the Earth of a certain diameter in 24 hours. Everything gets a little bit messed up if Earth is bigger. It has to be what it has to be. It's a deductive theory of science. It can't change. It's not inductive. You pull out one card from that house of cards and the whole thing comes toppling down. So the horizon is seen behind the ship. It's further away than the ship. So off the coast of Boston, I go to Revere Beach. Revere Beach is a beach just north of Boston. So the seaport, Boston, has a couple of shipping lanes go out to the north, and it's Broad Sound north and Broad Sound south. And I watch the ships go in those shipping lanes. And the shipping lanes, one is 5 miles off the shore, and one is 6 miles off the shore. So I know that the ships, I say, are 5 miles off the shore. They may be 6, but I'm saying they're 5 miles off the shore. And if my camera is a certain height off the water, and usually it's 3 to 5 feet above the water, I know the horizon's 2.1 miles to 2.7 miles away. So some of the water is curving, has to block some of the freeboard of the side of the ship. I don't know whether that happens or not. Maybe some of the freeboard of the ship is blocked. But I know it's not being blocked by the horizon, because the horizon is seen above the waterline of the ship. It's further than the ship. So there's a lighthouse, and it's 7 miles away, and I know the lighthouse is always on the horizon, because I can see the rocks under it. No, the lighthouse has to be blocked. The rocks under the lighthouse can't be visible on the globe. But they are visible, so I just say, well, the horizon's 7 miles out. It's further than the ship. That's all I know, is it's further than the ship. So I know the globe is wrong. And this is repeated. I've repeated this for several years. I've repeated it for ship after ship after ship. I don't see ships go over the horizon. I did once from Gloucester. And then oddly, at 20 feet high, the ship is partially blocked from the horizon. I go down to the beach and I can see more of the ship. So now maybe that's refraction. And I think the ship was hidden by refraction, not made visible by refraction. And there are a lot of other things. I mean, one thing I'd like to talk about are radio waves, if I can.
Well, and I was going to say, there is a lot to talk about. There's just so much to unpack, and you have brought so much information. As we're coming up here at the end, I have a couple of questions that I think are very different from what you've talked about. I'm curious. I don't know. I guess I don't remember if you had said you had kids or not. But I'm curious about your core nuclear family, the small group of people that we call our core family, right? I'm curious, do all of your family believe the same things you do, or is that, what does that look like for your family, and how has that been, I guess, received, and how do you get through Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving, huh? I'm not allowed to talk. Yes, my wife says I can't talk. So I have 5 children. I have one who builds. He works. Well, he doesn't even want to talk about it. He works for the aerospace, so we don't talk to him. He has guarded views. Yeah. I have a son who's a computer engineer, and he's a skeptic about everything. So he doesn't believe in anything. He's kind of like me, but he doesn't believe in flat Earth either, because he doesn't believe in absolutely anything. I have a daughter who's a school teacher. Now, I don't know if you know much about like the manufacture of consent or the necessary illusion or any of this stuff. So you know Chomsky. He's now in Arizona. I think he had a stroke. But he writes the manufacture of consent and how the mainstream media must manufacture myths so the government can rule. The teachers are the main people who have to perpetrate the illusion, the necessary illusion for government. Government can rule by sheer force, or government can rule by illusion, by myth. And a dictatorship or a totalitarian, well, both would be totalitarian, but a dictatorship would rule by sheer force. But here in the United States, we rule by mythology. We rule by illusion. So they don't have to use sheer terror to keep us in line. They control our mind very, very effectively. And this is what the whole media industry, Hollywood, this is what they're all about. It's controlling what you think, what you feel in every aspect of your life. So my daughter is one of those people that creates the necessary illusion. She's a school teacher. My other daughter is an accountant, and my other son is a doorman. So the doorman is more in line with my thinking.
So what do you talk about? Because I would imagine that would be really difficult.
Well, we can't talk about politics either, because I feel that, the political parties have switched positions, and the Republicans are now the Democrats, and the Democrats are now the right-wing neocon, Republican, warmongering, heinous people that want censorship. So we can't talk about that either.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I'm a Kennedy supporter, but no, I don't know now. I'll probably vote for Jill Stein.
So
and I can't talk about that either.
Yeah. So you stick to the grandkids. Is that
the grandkids? I'm not allowed to discuss any of this with the grandchildren, although if they ask me questions, I can give them veiled answers. I have a daughter and a daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law, who's a school teacher as well, doesn't like her children to know anything that's uncomfortable. So she protects them from any discussion of warfare or politics or any of that. She doesn't feel because of COVID, because of the lockdown, they're now allowed to go online. So once they've been allowed to go online, they've been finding a lot of stuff out and asking me a lot of questions. So I have to be very guarded about how I answer that family's questions. My daughter, who's a school teacher here in the next town over in Belmont, in Massachusetts, allows me to discuss things freely with her children. And they have very keen questioning minds as a consequence. And they tend to discuss it with their friends, and their friends will ask questions about it. And they tend to be respectful. They don't marginalize flat Earth. They just are curious about flat Earth. And basically the concept I want them to be familiar with is that you learn things in school, but what you're learning isn't necessarily true. Just learn them and know what the teacher is telling you, but know that it may not be factual or truthful, and that there may be more information that they are omitting because it's not part of the curriculum that they're legally allowed to teach you, because they're not illegally allowed to teach everything.
So I will say, Joe, one of the things that I like about this conversation, although I do find it hard to not sit here and just argue with you on a lot of different points. And I'm trying, as I stated earlier, I'm trying to stay open-minded. But when you get to the root of it, the sharing of ideas is more important than I think who's right or wrong. And I think, even in my lifetime, when I was younger, a lot of people in society was more open to understanding a new, fresh idea than I think we are in today's world. Again, there's nothing that says that what you proposed here today is something that I'm going to walk away and start believing tomorrow, but you haven't demanded that. But what it has had us do is it has given us something to think about. And I think asking questions, for whatever reason in society, we've either forgotten the importance or we're afraid to ask questions that go against the normal. And I think that's a lost art. And if anybody's in search of education or of knowledge, the first thing you have to do is be able to ask questions. And if you can find a way to do that without tearing the other person down or without completely just disrespecting their point of view, but you can come to a table and say, I don't understand this. I don't think you're right. I want you to teach me what you know. not that it's going to convert somebody, but at least it brings those ideas to the table and gives somebody the opportunity to look at them for themselves. And that's one of the things, I have 3 children. One of them is now in college. 2 of them are coming through the public school system. And I think they are very smart children. But one of the things that I have taught them is I said, I want you to have the ability to learn, to teach yourself, not just hear what somebody tells you and regurgitate it back onto a test. And so one of the things that we do as a family is I teach my kids, don't just take even what I say at face value. Go ask a question. Go look at for yourself. Bring me questions that you have on any topic. And if you disagree with me or you agree with me, great, but let's have the conversation. And so I'm going to get off my soapbox here now, but everything that you're saying and you kind of given us your family dynamic, that to me just screams what's missing across our society is we need the ability to ask the questions and to be comfortable enough to be addressed with a new point of view that goes against our own without running away or hiding or getting angered by it, but allowing it to be there for us to have a decent conversation and potentially open ourselves up a little bit to learn something. So I'm going to get off my soapbox, but I do appreciate you coming on here. I do appreciate you talking about, I have 5 other questions off the top of my head that I need or want to ask you, but I just don't think we can get into it. I don't think it would do us any good to kind of crack this walnut anymore when we don't have another hour and a half to 2 hours to talk through it.
Can I just say one thing? I'd like to say just one thing in response to what you said. When I was given in Britain, where I got my PhD is granted for a contribution, a novel contribution to human knowledge. And when I was granted it, I was told that I should now go out and learn something. And then when I was studying to be a psychologist for licensure, I studied under a woman who was absolutely brilliant. She was a Russian-German refugee from the persecutions there. And she told me that the first thing I have to do if I want to be a psychologist is to forget absolutely everything I learned in books and to trust my gut. And it's very humbling when you work with people who are much smarter and you realize that as much as you know nothing. And if people remember that, I think that you can have conversations because you're always open to learning. And I think people shut their mind off to learning and to having empathy. And that's my comment on what you just said.
Well, I would just like to thank you for coming on. I feel like I'm coming away from this having repeated, not at all, actually. The conversation was completely different today than it was when we had our technical difficulties. But, what's interesting to me is that I just kind of thought about how I would, and maybe still, but I would have classified flat Earth as a conspiracy theory. And I just realized that people who believe in flat Earth have probably classified me as maybe a conspiracy believer or something, like how interesting that, we have some very similar places to come from. So I just want to say thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure to meet you. And, like I said last time, I could totally maybe not just talk flat Earth. It would be interesting to talk about other things with you also. But, if you're ever in the middle of the country, definitely reach out. I would be happy to have a cup of coffee with you. So.
Yeah, I like that very much.
Yeah. And again, this is the second time we've talked, and it's still very interesting. We've touched on things in this conversation that we didn't touch on, or we went deeper in this conversation than we did in the last conversation. So this is just a very, very big topic. And preparing for you to come on the first time and kind of reminding myself a little bit. And I got to be honest, the one thing this has done for me is now I have in my algorithms, and if I go to TikTok, I have these videos that get brought to me. So I continue to see some of the same things you're mentioning now and some of the arguments that go against it. And it's really kind of broadened my horizons a little bit. So for that, I say thank you, Joe. I know we haven't ever met in person, but just the ability to talk to you a couple times has cracked open my perspective enough that I'm allowing some of the stuff to come in to at least be entertained. Again, probably won't adopt a lot of it, but it is something that I never really even considered up until you came along and had our conversation. So for that, I think that's the biggest thank you I can give you. And so with that, I just want to say thanks and hope you have, a great rest of your day and your weekend.
Well, thank you. It's been very nice meeting you both, and it's been great talking with you about a difficult subject. Yes. And I think it's a very important subject.
Well, we
very
appreciate
difficult.
it. Well, and we just want to say thank you to all of you who have joined us along for this ride today. We will be back again in 2 weeks with another episode about another difficult conversation, maybe the one we talked about earlier, maybe it's a different one. We'll just let you be surprised. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks around the roundtable. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. And just remember that you can also like, subscribe, and share. And if you have a difficult conversation you would like Jamie and I to touch on, go ahead and give us an email at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Yes. And so we will be very anxious and interested to see all of your suggestions. So with that, Jamie, I guess we're done for today.
We'll see you all next time around the roundtable. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.